What's up, everybody? Thanks for joining me on V's Analysis. We're going to be checking out MSTR and Bitcoin today. So we're currently sitting at 338.41. It was a pretty solid day for MSTR overall, about a 5% jump today in the price. Of course, because Bitcoin started doing pretty well. The whole market did, I wouldn't say the whole market, but a lot of stocks did pretty well. Just overall, it kind of translated into that. And it flowed into Bitcoin and, of course, into MSTR, which is nice to see. MSTR divided by IBIT was up 2.29, which is also a nice sign. And, of course, we're going to go deeper into everything throughout this video, so make sure you stay tuned. But here on MSTR, you can see that we're back above our key structure right here. And we're starting to play with this range now, so we're just looking for price to bounce around here before we make some kind of decision. Same way as we always talk about. So we pretty much gapped up from 322 up to about 3%. And then we even pushed higher for the whole day. And we actually made it all the way up to around 344 at some point in the day, and then found a little bit of rejection. But it's looking pretty nice right now. The inverse head and shoulders is looking like that possible scenario. Like I said before, if we were to kind of chop, make it back down here, and then start making a move to the upside, then that'll be complete for that upside that we were speaking of. So definitely keep an eye out for that. Like I said, all these things are subject to change. If you've been around the market long enough, you know that just because an inverse head and shoulders does form doesn't even mean that it'll end up being a bullish move. It could end up falling through and just falling off a cliff. Things like that happen. You can't just be biased towards one side. You can have a little bit of bias, but you have to be aware of the other side as well. So we are getting that V-shaped recovery off of this severe drawdown that we saw, and it does look like we fell a little short of this bear flag that we were speaking of. It almost played out, I would say. It was good enough to say that played out, I don't know, maybe 80-90% of the way. And then it just didn't make it to that 282 or 284 mark that we were talking of. But like I said, again, nothing ever has to be exact. But we did have some kind of indication that it could potentially go down and break underneath the structure. And we did get it. We pierced through it. And we pushed right back through. So we are back in this range that we were previously in. We've been in here pretty much since August 19th and even prior. So we're just looking for sideways chop to finally make a decision if we want to break through above this key structure, use it as support, and then eventually make our way up to the top of that downward sloping trend line. More than likely find a little bit of rejection if we can make it there. And then the, of course, opposite would be chopping, falling through, and then continuing that move down to this next structure at 281. Weekly SMA is practically in the same spot. We are pushing up towards the 50. Expect a little bit of rejection once we get there. It's currently sitting at 348, so be aware of that level. Also, once you make it to the 351 to around 355 mark, expect a lot of rejection as we push up to the 200 and the 50-day SMA in confluence together. That's going to be a lot of rejection along with this key level of resistance. So even if we do break through it, I would expect rejection along the way, and it's probably going to be a little bit of a fight before actually being able to pierce through this and use this as a floor. The volume was relatively okay. It was at about 14 million. We have seen days that are much less than that. Like the previous day on Tuesday was 7.8. The day before was 12. The day before that was 11. We did have a pretty big 22 million volume day, but that was to the downside. And then 9, 10, 9. So it was it's been around where volume has kind of just been for the past however many months now. Nothing too exciting. Of course, we want to see the large volume days where we get these godlike candles. That's what we're waiting for. That's what we want to see. But of course, we need a major move on Bitcoin, and Bitcoin has been making some strides to higher levels. We'll see where that takes us. And when we take a look at global liquidity, we're still making higher moves. It is getting some kind of pullback, but that's pretty healthy. As you can see, we have major pullbacks plenty of times. throughout this climb. So hopefully that's just one of those little pullbacks to continue up higher and continue the momentum for a more extended move here for MSTR and Bitcoin. Bitcoin here on the weekly, looking pretty solid right now. We actually got to go over the monthly. We did close a little under where we wanted to close. We wanted to close at 115.7 or higher. We ended up closing on the monthly at about 114 exact. And now it looks like we filled that wick already. My first impression when I see something like this is this a good sign? Yeah, it's nice to see Bitcoin push up, but in the back of my mind, I'm also thinking, when you just look at this candle in general, if you look at candles enough, you'll know that a lot of times candles, it does happen when there's a lot of momentum. Typically, that's the only time that I usually see it, where a candle has literally no wick on the bottom. It's just flat. From that open, it's only gone up. Whenever you see something like that, it kind of concerns me unless we're in a very momentum driven move. If it's just heavy momentum and things are just flowing to the upside, it makes more sense. But right now, we haven't really seen that kind of momentum. And to see something like that, it kind of does make me wonder, are we doing an early retest for a move down? I'm not trying to scare anybody, but that's just the first thing that comes to my mind when I see a candle with pretty much no wick on the bottom. I just wanted to point that out really quick. It doesn't have to turn into anything. This candle can continue on up and just be a freaking godlike engulfing candle. Who knows? But that's just something to take into consideration. Like when you take a look at the weekly, this candle looks more normal, although it's the same candle on the monthly, but this just makes more sense. The candle, like the wick size, just makes more sense to the body. Yes, is it a large body? But yes, there's some kind of wick. On that other candle on the monthly, there's practically no wicks, which, like I said, that kind of does raise a little bit of concern for me. But this is nice to see. We did break above this structure here. We're in this zone where we're expecting some kind of chop until we can break through this. And this is where we want to be. So on the weekly, the ideal level is closing above right here, 120. You can close above 120.5, roughly in that ballpark. Retest the following week for some support. Continue on up to this next structure of this upward sloping trend line. That would be the best case scenario. That's what we're looking for. That's what we're hoping for. We'll be keeping an eye out for that. And once we can use this upward sloping trend line as support, then we can start talking about this dotted line and potentially probably a cycle top if we were to make it there and get some kind of aggressive move within the next 3 months, October, November, December. We typically see our cycle top every 4 years, 17, 21, and now theoretically in terms of time, it should be 25. So we'll see if we get that last push. If we do get an aggressive move above this 124 mark, that might be the cycle top, and it could change things. Maybe we don't get that exaggerative move that we were anticipating for 2025. Not to burst anybody's bubble, but on the weekly, like I said, we already bounced off this 20-week SMA using it as a floor, and we absolutely catapulted after breaking and using the 20 and 50 as support. Absolute godlike candle here on the daily. Beautiful close. We closed at around 118.6, exactly where price is at right now. Found a little bit of rejection so far at that 119 mark, which is at this level that we've already had drawn out for some time now. So we're not surprised to see that rejection. Let me pull this out a little bit further as we're already getting to this point here. So yeah, we're just looking for some kind of chop in this range before we make a decision. Like I said, ideally to the upside, and of course to the downside. We have to talk about that as well. We do have clean traffic here, so this could always chop and fall back through for a move down. And it's going to follow the same principle that we always say. If we get a close underneath, we hold it, hold the retest, then we're starting to look at this next level. The momentum right now is shifting towards the upside. Let me take a look at the daily. We've had 3 out of the last 4 days pretty bullish, so it looks pretty solid right now. When we take a look at the weekly Bollinger Bands, we are still in a pretty decent spot. We're not too overheated yet. We are above the midline, but we are slowly getting closer to the outer band, to the upside, that red band up top. And on the daily, we are a little overheated as we are finding a little bit of rejection, and that red band is in confluence with this upper structure right here, this key level of resistance. So we'll be keeping an eye out for that, see if we can continue to hug that and continue the trend higher. As you get to these outer bands, we tend to revert back to the most recent band after the fact, so be aware of that. On the RSI, we are pushing up towards our yellow moving average. We'll see if we can use that as support. Expect a little bit of rejection there. Hopefully we can break through and start to push towards overbought territory so we can see a nice green shaded area like we've seen in the past. And on the daily, we got a nice V-shaped recovery. Looks pretty solid, pushing towards higher levels. We'll see if we can get to overbought territory here. On the weekly MACD, we're in bullish territory still, but we're starting to see a little curl up to the upside. Momentum's kind of just sideways for the most part here on the weekly, so nothing too exciting there. On the daily, we are starting to look pretty good though. We got to flip back into bullish territory, and we're starting to see a green hill start to form. So we'll see if that momentum can continue to carry us to this upward sloping trend line and eventually above it, and use that as support before we see a little bit of a cool down. Maybe we can cool down on top of here, sit in the 120s before making that next push up higher. But I wouldn't be surprised if we see some kind of nice move here on Bitcoin, especially since we've been, kind of suppressed for the past month or so, kind of just been cooling off, not really doing much. So it'd be nice to see something like that. When we take a look at MSTR divided by IBIT, nice little move, nothing too crazy, 2.29% today. It is still pushing up towards this key structure, which we haven't even broken above. So ideally we want to sit at 533. We're sitting at 507. But it is a good sign to at least see some kind of upside instead of this absolute bearishness that we've been seeing. It does look like the trajectory is kind of changing a little bit. When you take a look right there, it looks like we got like a fake out, and now we're trying to break out again, depending on how you draw it, of course. It is starting to look pretty decent though overall. We'll see if this ends up being a real move, or maybe when you draw it like this, maybe we respected it, we broke out, and that was actually the retest for a move higher, which would be nice. That'd be very, very bullish for MSTR, showing that it's ready to outperform Bitcoin in this next upcoming leg. So we'll be keeping an eye out for that for sure. We were speaking of this key level of resistance here. After seeing that wicking action on this candle here last week, we started to say, maybe we could expect a little bit of a rally on Bitcoin because we saw that major wick here. So I thought once price pushed up here, we'd probably find rejection once again. Of course, in the back of my mind, I think, okay, there's a possibility that we could wick and actually fill this wick over here. We could wick down and fill this wick, which would be bearish for Bitcoin. After seeing that major rejection, my initial thought is that we get some kind of push down after testing that level, and it looks like that's exactly what we did. We'll see if we can actually break through the structure. Now that's going to be the real test there. If we can break through this one and this one, that's where we can really get our serious move for Bitcoin. If we can break underneath this structure, of course we have to break through this one first, but if we can get under here and hold that, we might be able to get a move at least back to this wick or maybe to the blue line. We'll see. Depends on how fast and how aggressive that move to the downside is, but we could really see a nice move on Bitcoin. So we'll be keeping an eye out for that. Now, there is a slight trend when you take a look here. We are slightly trending upward, but I don't know if that's a move of its own, like just this piece here, if it's just started to trend higher, or if we're actually just seeing we have to encompass this whole piece. Because if now you factor this piece in, now that's actually just a bear flag being formed. And we've talked about it in the other videos too, where if this is what we're seeing, then maybe that kind of makes sense. And we're pushing up for the big drawdown, which would be very, very bullish for Bitcoin. Because if we start to crack underneath this structure that we have, this form, we're forming this trend line upward. Upward sloping trend line. We break this trend line, And this structure, I think it's going to start to increase the odds that we actually surpass this last line in the sand, and we can start falling to these levels over here. But like I said, we have to break. Our eye should be focused on this area right here. If we can break this trend line and this structure, because that's going to be a lot of support and confluence together, if we can break that, I think it's going to probably have enough momentum to break through this one and then maybe continue on down. Of course, I can be wrong. I've been wrong plenty of times. I have no shame in admitting that, because everybody's wrong when you start talking about predicting what's going to happen. But that's definitely something to watch out for. When you look at the daily, you can see a trend that's a little bit more clear here. So we'll be looking at that. It is starting to hug the trend a little bit tighter, so we'll see if we actually break through that. That's going to be a very, very key level. So watch for that trend line to be broken. That's going to be probably a pretty big signal. Also, another reason why we were saying we could see a small rally, at least for Bitcoin, was because we have these weekly moving averages. We have the 50 and the 20. After seeing that rejection there, we were saying that this could be enough in confluence with the structure to suppress the price down a little bit, which would give Bitcoin that kick that we need. And now that we actually found rejection off the 200 as well, that was another part of our reasoning for a potential cool down period on Tether Dominance, which is good for Bitcoin. But now that we actually got to close underneath all three structures, or three lines, we're sitting underneath our 50 now. Got to close underneath that on the daily. Now we're retesting it. And now that should be acting as a level of resistance to push price a little bit further down. Now it's going to be sandwiched between this 50 and this key structure, which is this structure is going to outweigh this SMA. But if we can fall through it, that's going to be incredibly bullish for Bitcoin. And we could be seeing an early head and shoulders as well. I don't know if you guys see it already, but you have this left shoulder being formed, potentially forming a head. If Bitcoin were to kind of chop around, and if this were to happen, this is going to mean weakness for Bitcoin, and then push back down. Now you have your right shoulder, and that's going to indicate downside on Tether Dominance, which is very bullish for Bitcoin. And that might be enough firepower to push us all the way down to this next structure. Yeah, this is why I like to look at Tether Dominance, because I feel like you can kind of get a different view on Bitcoin. And just using these levels, you can kind of have a educated guess on what might happen short term, short to midterm on Bitcoin. Of course, we don't know exactly where it's going to go, but I feel like this definitely gives you a little bit of an insight outside of just looking at Bitcoin's price action. Because I feel like sometimes you get a little bit, at least for me, I feel like I tend to be a little biased towards the upside for Bitcoin just naturally. So it's nice to see a different perspective. I try to being unbiased as possible, and it does look like we're starting to see a little bit of a repeat of this move here. This move is happening over again. We had this pull down, and then a reset, a continuation down, a reset, potentially a continuation down. I'm going to pull a fib and see where that lands. Take a look here. That was at the 382 for that leg, and then that continuation down. And then if we pull off of this one here, that's right at the 382 as well. First one was a 3 to the 382 and a continuation down, which is very, very it's a very bearish sign. Here again, we touched the 382. We'll see if this continues down. If this starts to break underneath the 236 and start breaking underneath these wicks, that's more than likely going to signal we're going to get another leg like this, which means altcoins will start to outperform Bitcoin again in the upcoming leg if this plays out. So we could be seeing another piece like this. It all depends on how we draw it, but just a little idea. And that also does line up exactly with this key structure here. Man, I mean, it could signal some more downside. And then on top of that, there's just a lot of head and shoulders being formed here. You have a left shoulder, you have your head, after this, if we kind of like chop sideways and then roll over and we touch this structure, now that would be a right shoulder, which would indicate major, you're talking about, that's a major head and shoulders. That could indicate very, very large moves to the downside. If we were to measure that from the top of the head to the neckline, I'm not saying this is going to happen, but if it does, just know that this is why it's happening. Yeah, if we get a move similar to this, or we kind of just fall off from here, we have a head and shoulders being formed from that top of the head to the neckline, that's indicating a price move all the way down to 45%. I'm not saying it's going to happen for sure, because I don't know. I don't know if we'll get the altcoin season that we've been waiting for, but that would potentially signal it. That bear flag could play into this head and shoulders. So the bear flag could form the head and shoulders that could potentially lead us to the big drop that we've been anticipating. That's what everybody wants. That's what everybody's praying for, because once you get that move to that downside, that's where you're going to get your peak FOMO and hype and your cycle top. So we'll see. Of course, it takes a little bit of time to happen. Although this is pretty fast and it's a quick move, it still took a couple weeks, from March 29th to May 3rd. So, 5-6 weeks of straight falling off a cliff to reach that target. So be aware of that. But we're definitely going to be watching that. And if that were to happen, then we could potentially see this that we have drawn out start to play out, where ETH Bitcoin starts to outperform again, and ETH just starts to destroy Bitcoin, and that trickles down through the crypto market and into smaller market cap crypto coins. That's pretty much all I have for you guys. Make sure you drop a like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Let me know your thoughts. And I'll see you guys in the next one.